Hey everybody, welcome back to Race of History. Today we are going to get into a video from HistoryMarche. This is over the Polish invasion of Russia. This is something that was sent on the Discord and it's something I'm interested in. Actually, the other day somebody put a comment that was specifically referencing the Polish invasion of Russia. So it's kind of coincidental, I guess, that this got recommended on the Discord. But yeah, let's go ahead and jump into it.
In March 1604, an unknown young man came to the court of King Sigismund III in Krakow. He met with the Polish king and introduced himself as Dmitry Ivanovich, the son of the deceased Tsar of Russia, Ivan the Terrible, and the brother of the last Russian Tsar of the Rurik dynasty, Fyodor I Ivanovich. This meant that he was the legitimate heir to the Russian throne and the entire Tsardom, which was going through a difficult period of crisis due to the extinction of the ruling Rurik dynasty. In addition to rebellions and battles for the throne, Russia was hit by a huge famine in which hundreds of thousands of people died. This period is known as the Time of Troubles. Until then, it was believed Tsar Dmitry Ivanovich, the youngest son of Ivan the Terrible, had died 13 years earlier under mysterious circumstances.
That seems like a bit of an understatement, calling it the Time of Troubles. That was just funny to me.
So it was a minor miracle when he arrived in Krakow to ask Sigismund and the Polish nobles for support in overthrowing the usurper of the Russian throne, Boris Godunov. Privately, many Polish and Lithuanian magnates doubted Dmitry's aristocratic origins, but they conveniently stayed silent on the matter, for their ambition was to take advantage of the vast Russian territories. To garner support with the Polish king, Dmitry converted to Catholicism and promised territorial concessions if he became Russian Tsar. Sigismund saw this as an opportunity to expand his influence towards Russia, while the proponents of Catholicism wanted to use this to spread their religion to the east. In addition, the idea for the formation of the Polish-Lithuanian Muscovite Commonwealth was again at the top of the agenda.
That would be insane. I mean, imagine what the future of Europe looks like if there is a state that looks like that at the northern border. I mean, it's on the Baltic, it's touching the rest of Europe, it's, you know, as far east as Russia goes. It's just, that would be insane.
However, with his armies busy on other fronts, the Polish king could not officially support this enterprise. But he gave a handsome sum of money to this young man, who claimed to be Dmitry, to hire mercenary troops, while some of the nobles of the Commonwealth provided the majority of the army in support of this campaign. Soon, news that Tsarevich Dmitry Ivanovich was coming with an army reached Moscow. Alarmed, Tsar Boris Godunov went public and spread the story that the man who pretended to be Dmitry Ivanovich was actually a runaway monk, Yuri Otrepyev, and that the real Dmitry died 13 years ago in 1591. But despite Godunov's declarations, his popularity sharply declined as he lost support of an ever larger number of nobles. By the fall of 1604, Dmitry had gathered around 1,600 soldiers from Poland, 2,000 Cossacks from Ukraine, and some mercenaries. And then, in October, he invaded Russia. Early on, Dmitry had the advantage and conquered certain cities without encountering much resistance, but soon he suffered a heavy defeat in the Battle of Dobrynitsy. As fortune would have it, he overcame this difficult situation exclusively due to the sudden death of Tsar Boris Godunov in April 1605. Boris's son, Fyodor II Godunov, ascended the throne, but both he and his mother were killed soon after. In June, the man claiming to be Dmitry triumphantly entered Moscow and was crowned Russian Tsar. To strengthen his alliance with Poland, he married a Polish noblewoman, Marina Manisha, who became the Russian Tsarina in May 1606. But the situation quickly deteriorated from there for the new Tsar. Russian boyars were quick to notice that Dmitry was surrounded by foreigners at his court, primarily Poles. The strong influence of the Catholic Church at the palace was also a source of irritation. The last straw was that the new Tsarina Marina did not convert to Orthodoxy, which was a tradition in Russia.
Yeah, there was no way that this was going to work between the Eastern Orthodoxy and the Catholic Church. Like, there was no way that he was going to be able to thread this needle. He owes too much to the Poles, but the Russians are not going to accept, essentially the Tsarina being a Catholic Pole. I mean, that's not going to happen.
Fearing westernization of Russia, the boyars plotted an attack on the Kremlin. False Dmitry was killed, cremated, and his ashes fired from a cannon in the direction of Poland. Vasily IV Shuisky, a leading Russian boyar with distant origins from the Rurik dynasty, was proclaimed Tsar of Russia. Further unrest followed, with Moscow itself besieged. However, the rebellion ultimately died down.
So you have this usurper, essentially, that takes the crown of Russia. You have a maybe legitimate heir that gets the backing of the Polish crown to essentially go attempt to take the Tsardom back. He goes, and just by happenstance, basically, he gets it. But then because of the line in the sand for the Russians, and because of the help that he got from the Poles, that ends up not working, so he's killed. And then you have a new Tsar that isn't connected to the royals. And then immediately after that, you have another major rebellion breakout. This certainly seems like a time of troubles.
Stranger still, in the summer of 1607, another Dmitry Ivanovich appeared, claiming he had survived the attack on the Kremlin, and then started a rebellion against Vasily IV.
God, this is, what's his name? The brother of Cambyses. God, that's going to drive me nuts, but I can't think of it off the top of my head. I hate when that happens. I hate when I'm recording and there's something that I absolutely know and then immediately just go completely brain dead whenever I start recording. But anyway, the brother of Cambyses, when Darius essentially takes the throne of the Persian Empire, is supposedly killed by Cambyses, but then there is a usurpation from somebody who's claiming to be Bardia, there we go. There's somebody who's claiming to be the supposedly dead brother Bardia, who then takes the throne. Darius goes and kills him. And then later on, there is another revolt that starts under another guy who claims to be the dead brother of Cambyses, Bardia. It's the same thing here. You have this, whenever somebody dies under mysterious circumstances, you kind of have this thing where people can take advantage of the mystery and kind of the shroud of, people not knowing really what happened to say, no, that's not actually what happened. Actually, I've been alive all along and I've been here or there, whatever. And then immediately you are just now the new person, whoever it is that you are impersonating. And so this happens quite a bit historically, and it seems kind of odd, but whenever there's so much put into claim for something throughout history. If you have ties to something, if you have a claim to something, there is so much stock put into that, especially by the nobles and kind of the masses in general, that if you can convince people that you do have that tie or that you do have that claim, it really puts you in a position where you could potentially take power.
It was lost on no one that this man was an imposter of an imposter. Yet the new Dmitri garnered support from the magnates who supported the previous Dmitri, whose charred remains were fired from a cannon. Even Marina Manisech, the wife of the previous imposter, confirmed that this new Dmitri was her husband. In the ensuing turmoil, Dmitri was able to gather a strong army and took control over a large territory in Russia. The Crimean Tatars and the Nogai horde used the upheaval to ravage unprotected Russian lands, which created complete chaos. Vasily, realizing that he was in a very difficult position, in February 1609 made an alliance with the Swedish king, Charles IX, to defeat Dmitri, and in return handed over the Korela fortress to Sweden. In March, the Swedish army under the command of General Jakub de la Gardie went to the aid of the Russians. In Novgorod, it united with a part of the Russian army and headed for Moscow, which was under siege. Seeing Sweden's interference in the Russian Civil War, King Sigismund III immediately prepared for the campaign, not allowing Sweden, of which he was once king, to expand its influence. Since the Zebrzydowski rebellion in Poland ended at this time, Sigismund rallied support of the nobles, the Catholic Church and the Pope, and raised a strong army. The Polish-Lithuanian host of about 22,000 soldiers under the command of King Sigismund III himself invaded Russia in September and besieged Smolensk. The imposing fortress of Smolensk was of great strategic importance at this time. The one who controlled it could easily break through towards Moscow. However, the city was well fortified and the siege dragged on. On the other hand, Sigismund's campaign negatively affected Dmitri's position, because most of the Polish troops serving under him now deserted and joined the army of the Polish king. In addition, Sigismund's ambitions grew, and he no longer wanted to appoint Dmitri as Tsar of Russia, but wanted the whole of Russia for himself. Allied Russian-Swedish forces under the command of Shusky inflicted several defeats on Dmitri, and then gathered a large army and set out to deal with the greatest threat, the Poles. Learning of the movement of the Russian army, Hetman Stanislav Żółkiewski led a small part of the army, primarily cavalry, to intercept the enemy, while most of the Poles remained near Smolensk. At the end of June 1610, Żółkiewski defeated a Russian vanguard of about 5,000 men near Zaryewo-Zaimiście, and then surrounded and besieged their camp. Realizing that the rest of the Russian army was nearby, he left some of his men to watch on the besieged enemy soldiers, and with the rest he went to the Russian main army.
Man, that's ballsy. So first off, the Poles are sieging everything, right? They immediately go to Russia and they start besieging. Now, Smolensk makes sense. It makes a ton of sense, especially because if you take Smolensk, then you're kind of on your own schedule because you have the upper hand on the road to Moscow. And so you would have to be then besieged and pushed out in order to kind of get your foothold out of Russian territory. However, taking just a group, a part of the army, and going in search for the co-Russian Swedish army seems like a pretty ballsy move, but that's just me.
After a long night march, Polish soldiers appeared in front of the encamped Russian army before dawn on July 4th, 1610.
Yeah, here we go.
When the winter stars arrive.
As Russian commander Dmitri Shusky was not even aware that the enemy was in their vicinity, Stanislav Żółkiewski wanted to carry out a surprise attack. But as he waited for all the soldiers from the long marching column to arrive, such an attack was impossible to carry out. Dmitry Shutsky's army was deployed in two camps. In one camp were the Swedish mercenaries gathered from all over Europe and numbered about 3,300 soldiers. In the second camp were Russian forces numbering about 20,000 troops. In addition to this, they also had 11 cannons. On the other hand, Zholkevsky had only 2,500 cavalry under his command, mostly winged hussars, then 400 Cossack and 200 Polish infantry, and 2 cannons. The infantry and cannons were late, and they were still far from the battlefield. Before the battle itself, Stanislav Zholkevsky ordered the surrounding villages to be burned, so that enemy infantry could not use them for defensive purposes. The fence and obstacles that served to slow down the onslaught of cavalry were also partially destroyed. Russian forces were soon also deployed, but because they were located between the Vidovka and Gzhat rivers, they could not be spread to take advantage of their numerical superiority. Their troops took up positions behind the damaged fence. Behind the left wing of their army was a strong group of Russian soldiers, mostly composed of mobilized men, and they served as a reserve because it was not possible to deploy them on such a terrain. It is noticeable that Zholkevsky concentrated his main forces on his right wing. At about 4 o'clock in the morning, Polish trumpets and drums gave the signal to the hussars and marked the beginning of the battle. Alexander Zborovsky's heavy cavalry attacked the center. At first they advanced slowly, but when they approached, a fierce charge was launched towards the enemy in order to collide at the highest speed. The first contact was disastrous for the front lines of the Russian army.
Yeah, this is what the winged hussars are good at, right? They're the heavy cavalry. They love coming in and just smashing shit.
Though the Polish hussars could only pass through the gaps in the fence that they had partially destroyed before the battle, they inflicted heavy losses on the enemy.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. This is kind of a weird layout here because you have pros and cons for both sides. The two rivers make it to where the battlefield is really condensed. But that's also not super conducive to the cavalry. And then as you can see, there's like, you know, forestation, there's obstacles. You got the village out of the way, but there are still things in the way that would make this sort of a hindrance for a major cavalry battle. And so there are things that on both sides you could see are like advantages and disadvantages. So it's kind of interesting that the Poles saw this layout and situation and decided, okay, it's advantageous enough that we'll go ahead and go forward, even without their infantry and cannons there.
Russian battle formations gradually started to disintegrate and were forced into a slow withdrawal. The hussars, having lost momentum, quickly reorganized their formations and launched a new attack on the second Russian line. In response to this, the Russian cavalry from the second row set out to meet them. A new bloody showdown ensued. However, the Polish riders lost most of their long lances in the previous attack, limiting the shock of their charge. A fight with swords and sabers occurred, yet the Poles continued to advance into the depths of the Russian army formation. And again, as they lost momentum and became threatened from the flanks and rear, they withdrew in formation to the starting positions. During that time, the Polish left wing, under the command of Mikołaj Struś, had difficulties with the Swedish mercenaries. Since the fence on this part of the front was only slightly destroyed, the cavalry charges were less effective. Although the Swedish mercenaries were unmotivated to fight because they did not receive their salary on time, their discipline, training, and equipment successfully matched the Poles. The Poles found themselves in a very difficult position here. Enemy musketeers, protected by the fence, fired at cavalry from close range, while pikemen did not allow the Poles to break through the lines. Meanwhile, a new charge on the Polish right wing occurred, with fresh Polish units. The Hussars again dealt a heavy blow to the enemy's front line. They began to break through the mass of Russian soldiers and gradually advanced north. However, when they broke through, the Poles were again left without most of their lances, and the second Russian line stopped them again. Threatened from the flanks, these units started to retreat, while a third wave of fresh Polish Hussars started to advance. The less numerous Polish left wing could not make similar breakthroughs. Swedish mercenary pikemen and musketeers proved a solid defensive combination, and musket fire also had an important psychological effect on humans and horses. After a long fight, the first line of cavalry started retreating here as well. When the first line successfully left the battle, troops from the Polish second line of the left wing rushed forward. Here the Poles carried out attacks by expanding their ranks in order to be a harder target for the musketeers. The charge was no more effective than the previous one. Although the Poles tried to widen the gaps in the fences, which was a dangerous obstacle for them, they were not successful. Enemy musketeers, although inaccurate, opened fire on the Hussars again and again. After a Polish horseman was left without his lance, he was forced to fight with a saber, which made the battle easier for the Swedish pikemen.
So this is interesting because, like I said, pros and cons for both sides. The cavalry can do this pretty consistently. And I mean, it depends obviously on the amount of casualties you're taking, but that's kind of the thing with cavalry, right? Is you can have these kind of continuous hit and run sort of engagements, where if you're not taking a ton of casualties, you can basically do it until the horses are done, right? Obviously, you can see on the left side of the screen here, the Polish cannons are they're about to show up. That was something I was wondering a minute ago. If you had this initial Polish line of incredibly, condensed and packed in cavalry from the Poles, why were the Russian cannons not brought out? It seems like that would be, something that you would want to take advantage of. I get that once they expand and once you kind of no longer have that ability, but if they're going to all get right into a group to try to slip through this spot in the fence, it seems like this is an area where a cannon could really excel. But I don't know. Let's see what the Poles do with their cannons as you see them, the two of them coming on the field here.
The situation on this part of the front improved after the Polish infantry and two cannons finally arrived on the battlefield. They opened fire from a distance in support of the Hussars. Meanwhile, the right wing was almost completely left without fresh units. It seemed that despite strong charges and deep breakthroughs, they could not break the enemy formations. Because of this, Stanislav Żołkiewski gradually sent reinforcements from the army reserve to his right wing. But despite this, most Hussars were still left without their lances and were by now tired and demoralized. Nevertheless, the Hussars continued to carry out their orders and launched a new attack on their opponent. As the front lines of the Russian left wing were by now weakened by the intense fighting, the Russian cavalry set out to meet the Hussars in order to slow down the Polish attack and give their comrades time to regroup.
This may be what the Poles need here, because the second line is where they're continuously getting stopped. The second line has that cavalry in it. Maybe if you can get through the cavalry first, this is an area where you can do some damage. I still sort of don't understand picking a spot for battle where your cavalry is really going to have a hard time. But that's, hindsight.
Soon the two armies clashed and a real cavalry battle ensued. The very beginning of the fight was uncertain, but soon the skill and discipline of the Hussars prevailed and gave results. the Russians set out on a total retreat north, followed by Polish cavalry. However, the Russian cavalry managed to fulfill its task and slow down the opponent, and the Poles, realizing that they had lost momentum again, retreated to their starting positions. Shortly after this retreat, the Russian ranks spread and opened the way for a new cavalry detachment that set out to attack. These were the Reiter detachments, cavalry that carried firearms in addition to their swords. The Polish troops, which had been resting and preparing for the next attack so far, reacted quickly and set out to meet the enemy. When the Poles came within range, the Reiter detachments abruptly turned and opened fire. They then wheeled about and galloped back towards their own army. The Poles remained steadfast and continued to advance, but the second line of Reiter detachments appeared in front of them and also performed the same maneuver. This time, the Hussars proved their mettle by accelerating into the hail of bullets, catching up with their opponent. A new cavalry battle occurred. The clashing of steel and the screams of men pierced the air as the highly trained Reiters and Hussars stood toe-to-toe. The Polish advance slogged forward, but it seemed that this was another attack that would end with only limited success. But the stubborn Poles refused to back down, and at one point the Reiter detachments reached their breaking point and started fleeing towards their comrades. Seeing the mass of their own cavalry and Polish horsemen rushing towards them, the whole Russian left wing collapsed in panic. The first ranks began fleeing, and their escape provoked a chain reaction in which the entire Russian left wing set out in an unorganized retreat towards their camp. Fleeing.
This is absolutely the worst case scenario. You've held up and held up and held up against continuous charges. The Poles are tired. There really hasn't been much give or take, but you know, this is what it is. I've talked about this before. The Greeks said that the god Phobos ruled the battlefield, the Greek god of fear, and you know, once panic hits one person, you start to see a chain reaction, because what do you do? What do you do if you're in a unit and you're on the front line? It's one thing if one person in another unit panics, but what if that one person gets another 2, 3, 4 people to start panicking, and then the unit next to you entirely starts panicking? Well, what do you do? Because chances are they're going to flee. So do you stay there and take the chances that all of the other units around you are going to hold your ground? Or do you, realizing that, there's a good chance that a collapse is coming, do you turn around and take off? And normally, everybody decides, all right, well, it's time to get the hell out of Dodge, and they turn around and take off. And you can understand the thought process, because you don't want to be the last ones there. Especially with an army of cavalry, you don't want to be the last ones there, because then you're not going to survive the retreat. And so once that panic starts to hit, it's, in a lot of cases, it just totally collapses the army.
Being the Polish cavalry, many were cut down, while they continued their retreat much further than the camp. During that time, the Russian right wing was still stable, but was soon exposed to new attacks. An important role was also played by Polish infantry, who first shot at the enemy, then drew their swords and also launched a charge. Probably the greatest impact on the breakdown of the Russian right wing was the attack on their left flank, which was now fully exposed. After a long battle, it was clear that the Swedish mercenaries could not win, and they started to retreat. Unlike the left wing, the Russian right wing withdrew in an organized manner, and here some of the Reiter units played a major role, covering the retreat of the infantry. After more than 3 hours of heavy fighting, the Battle of Klushino ended. Although Stanislav Żółkiewski managed to defeat his more numerous opponent, 2 enemy camps full of soldiers posed a major threat. However, Żółkiewski offered the mercenaries to side with him, and a good deal of them did, probably disappointed because they did not receive their payment on time from the Russians.
Yeah, so you didn't get your payment on time. You go out there to fight, you get your teeth kicked in, and not only do you get your teeth kicked in, but you do your job. You hold the right flank. And, you know, the whole right side of the line has held, even though it didn't look great, it held the whole time. Then the other side collapses. You then get hit right in the side of your flank because there's nobody guarding your flank anymore. So, yeah, I could see being slightly annoyed at the way things have played out.
Those who refused to accept this offer were permitted to leave the camp peacefully and head back to Sweden. Dmitry Shuisky then initiated the withdrawal of the remainder of the Russian army. The Poles took advantage of this and rushed towards his camp to plunder it as soon as possible. After the battle, the Russian soldiers surrounded near Zaryovo-Zaymyshche heard about the defeat of their army and decided to surrender, with some of them joining the Polish army. Reinforced by additional troops, Żółkiewski continued with his army to the east and soon entered the Russian capital of Moscow on October 8, 1610. He captured the Russian Tsar Vasily Shuisky, as well as the defeated commander Dmitry Shuisky. This marked the beginning of the Polish occupation of the Russian capital, which lasted for 2 years. If you've made it this far into the video, thank you for watching. And if you'd like to support our work like all these amazing...
Yeah, so the comment that I got the other day was specifically in reference to this. The idea that, you know, historically it's a really bad idea to invade Russia. And I would say it is for the most part. However, the Poles don't have a terrible time of it. You know, they get Moscow. And there are other groups that are able to do it. And I know this is before the collective idea of Russia is a thing, but you know, the Mongols do it with basically like a cavalry detachment, you know? So it's not unheard of. It's just there have been some extremely disastrous results from it. So that was the Battle of Klushino for the Polish invasion of Russia by HistoryMarche. Really good video. If you have any other recommendations for videos, anything you want me to watch, you can put it on the Discord. We have a page on the Discord that's specifically for YouTube recommendations, or you can put it down in the comments below, and I'll try to get to, you know, I make a big list and try to kind of work my way through stuff. And depending on what we're doing, I may move a couple of videos. If I'm doing a subject, then there's another video that's like, you know, kind of connected to that subject in some way or another. But anyway, as always, like, comment, subscribe. Help me keep building the channel over here. And I will see you all next time.